People who work in the strategy field often wonder, where are we going? Where is this bus ride going? Strategic problems are not getting easier to answer. They're only getting more complex, and the field appears to be here to stay. But how do we challenge ourselves to stay relevant? What will make us relevant in the future, and how do we continue to have an impact? Are questions that we routinely ask ourselves. For example, the Strategic Management Society, who's a leading organization in the field, has up on their website 6 big questions in strategic management for all of us to consider as we try to solve these problems and as we try to consider what are better management practices in the future. But overall, this can be a really hard question to answer. And the reason why is because most of us have no clue where strategy came from. We have had an understanding that strategy's been around for a while, but where did it come from? What was its origins? And how are we supposed to understand where something is going if we don't know where it came from? Yet and still, when I was in school and certainly when I did training, there was very light work, light touch on the topic for me to get an understanding. So we'll start this with a history lesson. On this visual, you can see Bruce Henderson, Bill Bain, Fred Gluck, and Michael Porter. These are 4 giants in the field. Bruce Henderson is from Nashville, Tennessee, like myself, and started the Boston Consulting Group. Bill Bain broke off from the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, to start Bain and Company. Bill Bain is also from Tennessee. What can I say? The most enterprising and best strategists come from Tennessee. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Fred Gluck pushed McKinsey, who was older than either of those firms, into strategy practice and got McKinsey involved in the game. And Michael Porter pushed strategy into the capstone course at Harvard Business School using his thoughts on competitive strategy, competitive advantage, and of course, his 5 forces framework. However, this history that we just laid out high level on this visual is not linear. It's full of competing ideas, consulting engagements, real life impacts on people and companies, and just lots and lots and lots of people involved in the story. Fortunately for us, our book today took a very comprehensive look at that history and tried to piece it together for us. So let's jump into learning how the lords of strategy shape our modern business world. But before we go any further, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Patrick Norton. I'm a co-founder at StratThink, and I've been working in strategy for about 10 years now. I started in consulting at Bain & Company and then moved into other strategy or strategy-related roles in other companies here in the Atlanta area. And if you allow me just a little bit more grace, I would just like to explain why StratThink is doing book reviews. Well, this is part of our education mission to democratize the topic and make it much more approachable and much more comfortable for people who are looking at strategy or making strategic decisions. Another thing that we want to do is give you a sense of what it's like to work with us, either taking the online course or hiring our consulting. And we want to give you the opportunity to interact with us either in the comments on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever you happen to find this video. But due to the dynamics and perceptions of this industry, I just want to say what it is not. We are not just taking frameworks and ideas out of books and just rotely applying them to your problems, just pulling stuff off the shelf and giving you solutions. Each solution is thought through and bespoke to your problems to get you moving forward. So don't worry, just because we're reading a ton of books and trying to get more conversation around some, quite frankly, some IP that's not directly ours, doesn't mean that you're not going to have a good time taking our course or working with us and get new insights as a result. And with that, let's talk about today's author. Walter Kiechel, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, it's the best I could find on Google, is not your typical business writer. He's a journalist. After graduating from Harvard, he served in the Navy, and then he left the Navy to go back to Harvard to get his MBA and his JD, graduating in 1977. He joined Fortune magazine and rose through the ranks, becoming managing editor in 1994. He guided or led the magazine's management of coverage during that entire time. He focused the magazine on delivering ideas, strategies, and solutions for decision makers and left Fortune in 1995 to join HBS Press, Harvard Business School Press. He became the editorial director in 1998 and then left in 2003 to freelance, and he also did some lead editing for HBS during that time, off and on. In 2010, he wrote The Lords of Strategy, which is based on his 3 decades of reporting and writing and over 100 interviews that he did behind the book. Overall, I have to say that I think Kiechel is immensely qualified to write this book. He has been thinking about the people behind strategy, the trends in it, and this greater context over the course of decades. And it gives him a really unique perspective to pull it all together. So I'm appreciative that he took the time to do it. And as you'll see, we're appreciative of the read. And with that, let's talk about the book. The book was written in 2010, as I mentioned, and the goals of the book are threefold. First, it wants to explain how we got here with strategy and the business world in general. Second, it wants to provide context on the key individuals and frameworks and the different schools of thought in strategy. And third, it wants to have a multidimensional conversation on the good and bad dynamics of the field. As you can see from these three goals, it's not about just laying out a linear history of names, times, and faces, but also to give us the heart and the oomph and the feeling of how we should think about these events in the context of events that are going on today. Not just an exploration of the intellectual side of strategy, but also an exploration of the feeling and the people side of strategy as well. And with that, let's get into the book summary. Obviously, this book is a history book, so we're going to go the route in this book review, like a lot of book reviews go, which is to talk more about the themes, the implied and explicit themes in the book, rather than give you a chronological retelling of it, because that would just be me reading the book to you, and I don't want to drag that out for you guys. And spoiler alert, in certain contexts, I hope that you guys end up reading the book just to spoil the recommendation there a little bit. So we're going to stick to the major themes of the book. One of the first implied themes of the book that I picked up on is strategy's youth. It's a young field. The start of the strategy consulting industry can be pointed back to the founding of BCG in 1963. That's when strategy in business and corporations started. Michael Porter's ideas for strategy didn't even get into the Harvard curriculum until 1979. And the highly influential book, In Search of Excellence, was first published in 1982. It's young. Now, you might be thinking, wait, management consultants have been around forever, and that's basically true. There have been management consultants since the late 19th century, but that's been more about management practices and tracking better metrics than necessarily focusing on strategy. And I'll get more to that in just a second. But just for some greater context, strategy is younger than color TV, which was invented around the late 40s and the early 1950s. For further context, strategy is younger than the tech industry, which is often considered to have started in America in 1947 with the invention of the transistor. So this is a field that's young and still making its way. Now, some of you might find this incredulous, as the author puts it, who also pointed out that some people might not believe this, because you might be thinking, well, strategy's been around forever in corporations, right? Well, he makes a very good point that is a very fine line to draw in business in general, which is businesses have always had plans. They haven't always had strategies, and those are two different things. They have always had some understanding of how to make money, some understanding of their consumers, and some understanding of how to compete based on the information that they could get off of their competitors. Strategy is a totally different thing to a certain extent, in that it's a very intentional choice to be very aware of not just what those things are, but to get deeper understanding of those things and to make intentional choices from the menu of options that you can have by studying strategy intentionally. So it's not just having some understanding of what's out there and then building a plan and executing on it. It's really digging in and getting that understanding and making choices off of it. So you might be thinking, so how did we evolve from just planning to do strategy and planning? Well, the author points out that this occurred over time. Strategy wasn't something that was just declared and then just happened. It was basically the result of a chemical mixture and a bunch of catalysts in the macro economy that created this. He refers to this as a few things in the book. One is the four horsemen of the corporate apocalypse. The other is greater Taylorism, and the other is the fiercening of capitalism. And essentially, taking a large step back, he looks at things like globalization, deregulation, shareholder capitalism, the capital markets loosening up and speeding up as reasons why things had to get more intentional about where you placed yourself in business, how you defended yourself in business, and thus brought strategy much, much more to the forefront and made it its own field starting in 1963. So if you're looking to be in a young field that is still defining itself, even after all this time, come over to strategy. We're essentially brand new in the grand scheme of things. Another thing that Kiechel talks about in the book is schools of thought. So, different ways that people think about how to do strategy and what strategy means to an organization. And I think this is a very important point to get because strategy isn't just one thing, and there's a lot of diversity of opinion, and a lot of the history of strategy is shaped from people taking different positions academically and professionally in these schools of thoughts and bringing these business ideas to market through consulting firms. So, at a high level, we're going to go over a couple of them the way that he goes over it in the book. So, in the book, he focuses mainly on two different schools of thought. One is the positioning school, and just reading directly from the visual, this school sees strategy making as the choice of where you want to compete in what industry, and from what spot within that industry, and how, on price, on distinctive products, or by finding a niche. And this school tends to criticize other schools for not being insightful, rigorous, or economically focused enough. And in the book, he highlights Michael Porter as kind of a leading voice in this positioning school. The school of thought as people, which is in contraposition to the positioning school, or at least positioned that way in the book, and there are different versions of it in the book, can be thought of as organizational learning as a simplification. At base, these people tend to think that the best way to make strategy is through organizational learning. Just to quote the book, the point, they say, is for the company to set off in one direction, learn from the response it gets from markets and competitors, and then adjust accordingly. And they tend to criticize the positioning school for overlooking the people involved and noting the fact that no strategy design on paper has ever worked as planned. Now, a little bit of side editorializing here. That's why you put in risk and mitigation to understand the point where you can be flexible in your strategy. So I'm not taking up the positioning cause necessarily in this since we're being divided in this, but it's such a popular point of view that I'd be remiss to point out that, as others have pointed out, that they actually go together. And certainly myself and StratThink has a much more utilitarian approach to how to use schools of thoughts and strategy in order to help get you to your goals. So not to stop to do an ad in the middle of the book review, but I warned you there's going to be a little bit more editorializing in here in general. So just for some additional editorializing, it is StratThink's, in my opinion, that this is the newest and most popular school of thinking, the people school. And we think that for two reasons. One is In Search of Excellence and the popularity of that book in the 80s and the 90s. And second is Jack Welch, who kind of embodied this ethos during his term as CEO of GE. And he's written on the topic a lot in the early 2000s. And you can point to one of his real life quotes that the book points to, which he says, in real life strategy, it's actually very straightforward. You pick a general direction and implement like hell. So a lot of folks kind of take that ethos from Jack Welch and apply it over and over again to just get out there, make plans, pick up from the plans what you need to be iterating on, and just go iterate. And I think that ethos pops up in a lot of different things. We can do more videos on that in the future if you disagree, but I think even though his legacy has been reviewed and it's a bit more complicated than initially thought, it's still highly influential. But even with Jack Welch, he recognized that we needed both. And an author that we cover in another book review, Richard Rummel in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, wrote that yes, he believed in stretch goals and he believed in getting out there and doing implementation, and he thought that strategic planning was a waste of time. But but Jack Welch also said himself, the first step of making strategy is figuring out the big aha to gain sustainable competitive advantage, which is what you do in the positioning school. So even though his words were kind of about getting out there, his books may have been about there, getting out there, getting feedback from the market, very organizational learning, very plans focused, based strategy. He does say that you need to find a way to get sustainable competitive advantage, which is right in line with Michael Porter, who is the appointed leader in this book of the positioning school. So, like I said, we use both, and it's not really that much of a competition between the two. I just find that it's important to be flexible. Along with another book at StratThink, we have identified generally four schools of thoughts in strategy that we cover in our online course. And sometimes, personally, when I'm dealing with a new executive, I will, and I hope nobody thinks this is creepy, I will actually look on their LinkedIn page at when their career started and what function they started their career in to get a sense of what arguments might be persuasive to them. If it's anything prior to the 1980s, it might be more about strategic positioning. Anything since the 1980s or the 90s or the early 2000s, then they're probably going to be more of this purported Jack Welch ethos. And then there are other schools of thought and functions that I can layer in there to help understand when I'm working with people. And that's just an example of how we try to be flexible. And I think generally most people try to be flexible in their strategy making and their strategic decision making process. But for the purposes of the book, the real life history is told through the competition between these schools and other schools of thoughts. And I think it's a great organizing mechanism within the book as well. Another key aspect of this book are the way the stories are told through companies who are often the clients, consulting firms, and academia. These are the main characters or the groups of main characters in this book, and it really sets the tone and it really brings how strategy is about people and how people pushing ideas really made this field. So, in addition to all this stuff that you heard me talk about earlier, strategies, youth, schools of thought, things like that, you get a bunch of other stuff. You learn about Bain's financial woes that it ran into after an insider trading scandal and problems with their employee stock option plan. You see Michael Porter kind of sniping at BCG and McKinsey about their frameworks and them sniping back. You learn how, and the authors of The In Search of Excellence, who were McKinsey partners, got thrown out of the firm for writing one of the most successful business books in history. So you learn about all these dynamics and how it's really the people and the stories that created this industry and created the trajectory that we're on with this industry and will create the future of this industry. Not as a very clean thing that comes down from on high, but in the continued conversation and shared communication between the practitioners of these ideas and the creators of these ideas and vice versa. So let's talk a little bit more about these competing ideas. So I don't want to make this as a blanket statement, but I think that this is a bit of an artifact of strategies past, if I'm editorializing once again. A lot of ideas are out there and a lot of ideas are public for people to use and understand in their business and strategy making. I think the real key in competing nowadays, and once again, try not to turn this into an ad in the middle of it, is that if you're looking at consultants and you think the person knows their stuff and you like the person on a personal level and think that you could solve a problem with them, that's probably your consultant to work with, regardless of whatever history of ideas or competing ideas are out there in the firm or out there for competition. I think the back and forth of ideas nowadays in businesses is more about creating that creative tension that gets to like really good decisions and really good perspectives that can be adopted throughout the industry. So hopefully that's where the industry is going. StratThink, as you guys all know, is starting this journey in the industry. So we will find out ourselves when we get there as well. But once again, it points back to kind of our utilitarian ethos to get to the best answer here and to get to the best understanding of everything. And that means for us, and a big reason why we wanted to review this book, is that we need to understand the stories of those companies, clients, consulting firms, and academia that this all came from. Another major theme in the book is around shareholder capitalism. More importantly, how shareholder capitalism impacts the real purpose of strategy. And it's a debate on whether hitting financial metrics and maximizing shareholder value is really the true purpose of strategy versus kind of the original purpose, which is to build sound, enduring companies that can maximize value over time, whatever that is, not for a particular group. So this debate gets laid out, and I think Kiechel really falls on one side of the debate, saying that shareholder capitalism is not strategy's real purpose. The finance wizards have not, as he puts it, have not revealed strategy's true purpose, but we have to be intelligent in how we deal with the concept because obviously all of our stakeholders are tied to the success of shareholder capitalism inside their own company. So it's an interesting balancing game that you have to play. Just to editorialize a little bit, I think a great way to think about it is to recognize that your strategic position is only so valuable. And if in your shareholder plans, if your plans for your equity stakeholders or your debt holders is beyond that position, then we have to think of options that get you beyond that position. Often starting from that position to move into different businesses or through M&A or other things that you can do. I'm not necessarily saying that the two ideas can live harmoniously together, as certain aspects of it will push and pull against each other. But I do think there's a level of judgment that you can bring to the topic. And I think that's about where the book lands on it, because it doesn't appear that shareholder capitalism is going anywhere anytime soon, just like the field of strategy. So it's a major theme in the book. It's introduced a little bit late in the book, and it's introduced antagonistically to strategy, but it's an open question, and an open question for all of you that you can engage in with us and in the comments about what role does shareholder capitalism really play in corporate and business strategy. The last major theme in the book that I want to cover, and I think this is a theme that's really implied throughout the book and really comes out through Kiechel's journalistic approach to the book, is how strategy should feel. And it's really talked about in two major ways, which is how the strategists feel about their own work and about how people feel about strategy, certainly after they've been impacted by strategy through consulting work mainly. So how did the strategists feel about the work? Well, Bruce Henderson, who we talked about early on, really viewed it as a case to be cracked, a mystery to be solved, and a problem that you can provide a solution to get everyone moving forward. That you can bring new ideas to it and fresh thinking to it and really change the makeup of your company for the better. The thing about Bruce Henderson, though, is that he engaged in what's called the seagulling approach, which is he would write a report, drop it off, and then fly out of there to the next thing and not really know what happened. It was left to the client to figure out how to implement, how to move forward with it. And at that point, Henderson and BCG were on to other cases. And there have been other things talked about those old seagulling days at BCG that have been brought up, but we won't get into that too much here. Bill Bain, who worked at BCG, wanted closer relationships and to try to drive these cases to results. And so he broke off from BCG to create Bain, which was supposed to have this results-driven ethos about it, counter to what BCG does. So really an interesting menu, I think, that you'd have back then in the 70s if you were an executive trying to pick one of these two strategy consulting firms to work on your upcoming strategies. And I think this maps how people tend to feel about strategy. Should we just be kind of analysts that drop off a report, or should we try to care more about the results that come out of it? I think a lot of these approaches have been blending. But two other things that Kiechel talks about is the discomfort that strategists can have with being deemed intellectuals and being deemed too academic, which I have lived through and I have seen. out of other people, something that Henderson would have never, ever had a problem with being labeled, um, and how they mitigate it, but also dealing with the fact that they want to be fairly elitist and work on only C suite problems and not necessarily work with management throughout the business on pure strategy work. And that's something that Henderson installed in the field. So I think to sum this up, if you're a strategist out there or you're engaging in strategy work and you have mixed feelings about the work or mixed ways that you're thinking about the work, totally normal. It's been installed in the field over time. And like I said, this field is very young. So there's not like one way to feel about it. Even really old fields like law, my, original profession, don't exactly know how to feel about themselves all the time either. So that's okay. But I think if I had to find a common theme is the idea around problem solving and getting results seems to be part of the strategist ethos at large. Getting to decisions, making those good decisions, and getting to the next decisions seems to be the thing that binds it all. And he explains how we kind of got there about how strategists feel about their work. How strategists feel about the job is one thing, and honestly, not the main focus. I think should be um, of the field of conversation. How people in general feel about strategy is a very, very interesting journey from my perspective. And it's something that Kiechel decides not to leave out. This is not a story that glamorizes the field or makes the field feel really good about itself sometimes. It's a very human look at things and something that you'd expect out of a journalist, quite frankly, at the end of the day. So, just to dive into some of the themes about how people in general feel about strategy, it is noted at times when that elitism that we talk about, that a lot of strategists are chasing, is off putting to some managers. And he talks about my former employer's tendency to alienate or weaken lower level managers at the companies that they work at because the focus is on the C suite. You can end up treating people the wrong way. That doesn't work. And I'm sure it happens everywhere. I don't know why my former employer was listed specifically in the book as an example of that, but it's in there. He also, I feel like, more importantly, hits the fact that frameworks have a limit, and in the early days of strategy, frameworks did hit those limits, and makes an example about the E curve. The E curve is a an estimation about how prices drop over time because your costs are dropping over time with your efficiencies. And sometimes in the book, it works well, and companies are able to gain share as they drop prices. And sometimes they start price wars, and people start referring to BCG in this case as ruining their companies. And when you ruin a company, you're ruining people's jobs, maybe their lives. So there's a heavy toll there to talk about in terms about how people feel about strategy, and that should inform us as strategists more about how to work with people in the field. So when Kiechel is not being as generous and pointing out how off-putting um, the consulting firms can be sometimes and how frameworks hit their limits, he is very encouraging to people to look at the strategy field in the correct way through three common misbeliefs to be discarded. The first common misbelief is that ideas don't really matter that much in business. And he, makes a good argument about how much they do matter and how much they've mattered for a while, and the fact that management consulting has lasted longer than strategy consulting. New ideas have been injected in business all the time, and they really do matter. The second we talked about before, so I won't belabor it here, is that companies have always had strategies. Companies have always had plans. They have not always had strategies. Those are really two different things. And then the last one, which is near and dear to our heart here at StratThink, is consultants are at best hangers on of only occasional limited usefulness. Now, obviously, we don't want to do that here at StratThink. We don't want to leave you thinking that StratThink. So I have to editorialize. Sorry if this comes off as like yet a third ad before the final ad in here, to say that really what we're trying to deliver is self efficacy. That is really what is the feeling that I think not only StratThink, but strategists as a whole should be delivering to the people that they work with in their companies, no matter where they are. Everyone can be confident in plans, but sometimes you're confident in a plan and you don't really know if that plan is taking where you need to be. And you can be very much believer in a high level strategy and have that hope, but you don't know if that hope is going to be realized because you're not sure of your plan. I think in strategy, you add to planning that hope. And then with good planning, maybe from other management consultants or just muscle that you have in the business, you add that confidence into that hope that strategy gives you, and it creates a self efficacy that not only do you think you're going to be able to achieve your goal, but you know how you're going to achieve your goal. And if stuff comes up in the future that you didn't expect, how you're going to get around that objective to achieve your goal. That's what I think strategy work should leave you with. That's how I think everyone should feel coming out of a strategy project. And I think that's the way that we combat that last feeling that we're hangers on of only occasional limited usefulness. Of course, StratThink is a firm that is on its journey right now and getting started on its journey. So we hope to leave that feeling with everyone that we work with. We hope we leave you with that feeling at the end of the online course. But we had to step aside to editorialize because Kiechel makes a big point about how everyone should feel about strategy work. And it's a lot of mixed feelings. You feel great sometimes. You feel like you did something off-putting sometimes. You feel like a detective sometimes, but you feel like you're pointing out the obvious sometimes. It's a mix of emotions. But at the end of the day, if you don't walk out of your strategy and your planning and you feel like, boy, not only do I believe in this plan, but I know exactly how this plan is going to work, then you're missing some bits of it and you got to put the two together. And that's what I think people should feel about strategy. So completely off topic to the book review, but once again, an editorial point, which is the only way that I can talk about it. Now, does Kiechel get all the way there in the book? Kind of hints at it here and there. It's not necessarily from the book that I'm left with this opinion. That's from 10 years of practice at this point. But I think as a journalist, he does a good job of giving you the mix and the broad range of emotions that you can feel about strategy work, and as a strategist, what your work actually does to give you a sense of what the field feels like and how the history of the field developed those feelings. And I think that's a good move for this book and a big plus for it in the major themes that it covers. And that's it for the summary. So let's get into the critical review. In the critical review, we ask ourselves 4 questions. 1, is it a strategy book? 2, what are some of the limitations of this book? 3, is the book well written / structured? 4, will this book help me if I am new to strategy or trying to do a strategy project at work? So, is it a strategy book? Reluctantly, I'm going to say no. It's a great history book. It's a great business history book. But our standard here is whether the book helps inform how to create that logical narrative between your mission and vision, your goals and objectives, and your tactics. And it doesn't really hit directly on that point. You will learn more about frameworks. You will learn more about what strategy is and things like that. But it's not quite that strategy focused book that we would point to call it a strategy book. So we're going to reluctantly say no, but honestly, if you read the book, and I've seen a little bit of YouTube where Kiechel refers to it as a strategy book himself, I don't mind the counter argument. This is not a hill that I'm interested in expiring on. Like I am good if you want to call it a strategy book. Just to be consistent from review to review, we're going to have to label this one a no, reluctantly. What are some of the limitations of the book? I would say inevitably, if you're writing a book like this, you're going to end up leaving people out. There are hundreds and thousands of people that have added to this history, have made significant contributions. And certainly, as the book notes, when it goes global, there are people around the world. This is a very US-centric book that have added thoughts to strategy and strategy practice. So I did a check of the index because I've read this book a while ago. So if you do read the book and see these people mentioned, please comment below so I can change parts of this video or at least acknowledge it. But like Barbara Minto isn't mentioned in this book. Roger L. Martin is not mentioned in this book. There are lots and lots of names in this book, but you can't get to everyone because getting a book that is a comprehensive view of the role of strategy in business and how it started in 1963 is just a giant, ambitious project. If you really wanted to do it like a historian, this would be, shelves and shelves of books and treatises on on the shelf in the business library. So I don't fault him for it, but I don't want everyone to think that only the names in this book that are mentioned are the only meaningful names in strategy ever. They are critical names to the origins of the field, but they're not the only ones. And, just want to make sure that everyone gets their flowers. To Kiechel's credit, he at no point in the book writes or says that this is the definitive word on this segment of business history. So I got to give it to him on this one. But it is a limitation on the book. You're not going to be knowing everything, and then everyone's going to have a little bit of a different point of view on how things went down. Yeah, so just take it from what it is, which is a good history, a good story to know that gets the general themes correct and gets you thinking about the right way, about the history of strategy, so that you can project what strategy should be doing in the future. Next question: is the book well written or structured? And I say yes. There are a lot of competing themes, a lot of competing ideas, a lot of ways to organize this book, and it still flows. I think there are parts where you have to go back and reference stuff because the stories are told a little bit asynchronously. You get a little bit of part of a story here, and then something else starts up, and then you have to kind of go back. But it stays as a fairly tight narrative, and Kiechel does a really good job of bringing the breadth of those interviews and the breadth of his experience to a very honest portrayal of strategy. At no point did I get lost. At no point did it feel repetitive. And certainly getting to the end of the book was a lot easier than a lot of other business books or history books, quite frankly. Will this help? Will this book help me if I'm new to strategy or trying to do a strategy project at work? Um, Maybe. Maybe it will. So hear me out for a second. I'm the type of person that historical context really does help me understand. I'm very naturally someone who will ask why about a bunch of things. And when the why is not satisfying, I tend to not believe in it as much as maybe I should. So having a book like this for me at the beginning of my career would have been helpful for some of the stuff that um, I started to encounter. But I still don't know if in that context I would have necessarily reached for that book or reached for this learning if I am live with a project right in front of me to get going. I think I probably, for me going back, I probably would have tried to do that in concert with another book that is more direct on how to do strategy projects, or if our online course on StratThink were available along with that to get some of the history and some of the practical to just get going. So this is a really hard question to answer for this one because it really does depend on where you draw your, going back to a term from before, your confidence, your hope, your self-efficacy in doing your work comes from. Does it come from being rooted in history? Does it come from just having the right tools and going at it with a little context? A very individual choice. So hard to tell. You're sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger. You're probably just going to have to search your feelings and figure out what is true and what you need to really believe in what you're doing. Um, but I'm not sure. I think maybe the safest thing to do is to read it a little bit later on. And that gets us into the StratThink recommendation. I think the safest thing to do with this book is to read it a little bit later on, unless you're very much a why person, a why person. This will give you a lot of why, especially if you're used to using historical context to fill in the blanks about why things are in a profession, why things are in an organization. You tend to do that a lot in strategy anyway, so maybe it fits right in line. If not, wait for the right time. Do a few projects, get a good understanding of everything, and then this fills in like how it got there and why some of the industry standards and some of the perceptions of the industry are out there. So that's our recommendation. It's a yes, depending on where you are with things and depending on the type of person that you are. So I would like to know, does this sound like a kind of book that you're going to read? Are you going to read it with other books? Come back to the comments and let us know if this review is accurate or if you had a different take on the book. We'd really like to know. We'd really like to hear from you. And that's it for our review of the Lords of Strategy. If you have ideas for books for us to review, it does not have to be a strategy book. Obviously, today's wasn't, in our opinion. Just drop that in the comments or reach out to us, and we'd be happy to add it to the list. Can't promise when we're going to get to it, but we're certainly happy to look at it and give that strategic perspective on it and give you an honest review of what we thought of it. And of course, if you like the way that we talk about strategy and business psychology and are looking to make the decisions that will move your business forward and get you unstuck from the problems that you're facing, then head over to StratThink.co. At StratThink.co, you can check out all of our offerings. We offer online courses that are self-led and partnered. We offer a bunch of different types of workshops, and we offer the traditional classical project-based consulting and individual consulting. All of our solutions are bespoke and designed to move you forward. Head over to StratThink.co where you can purchase the online courses or fill out the contact form or reach out to us via the admin email or reach out to us on LinkedIn or any way that you know how to get in contact with us. We'd love to talk to you and set up an engagement. Until then, thank you for watching this book review, and I wish you nothing but the best.